The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen. Once upon a time there were 25 tin soldiers. They were all brothers, for they had been made from the same tin spoon. As soon as the lid was taken off their box, they heard someone cry, "Soldiers, soldiers!" And then a little boy drew them out one by one and set them upon a table. It was his birthday, and they had been given to him for a present. Each man shouldered his gun and kept his eyes face front. They looked very handsome in their shiny red uniforms, but one was a little different from the others. He had only one leg, for he had been made from the last of the tin and had run out. Yet there he stood, as steadfast on one leg as the others were on two, and he is the hero of this story. On the table with the tin soldiers were many other toys. The most wonderful of all was a paper castle with tiny windows and a perfect miniature room inside. It was surrounded by small trees, and there were even looking-glass lake with wax swans swimming upon it. A beautiful maiden stood up at the castle at the door. She too had been cut from paper, but she wore a gauze dress and a little blue ribbon fastened with a brilliant spangle nearly the size of her face. The maiden held up both of her arms outstretched, for she was a dancer, and one of her legs was raised high in the air. From his place on the table, the tin soldier couldn't see it at all, so he supposed that she, like himself, had one leg. "That is the wife for me," he thought. "But she is much too grand. How can I offer her a box with 25 tin soldiers when she has a castle for a home?" Yet he could not take his eyes off the little dancer, who stood upon one leg without ever losing her balance. Late in the evening, when the people of the house went to bed, the toys began to play. They paid visits to one another and fought battles and gave balls. And the nutcrackers turned somersaults, and the pencils scribbled on the slate. Even the canary in his cage woke up and began to sing. Only the tin soldier and the little dancer did not move. While the other toys romped and chatted, they stood quietly, each one upon one leg, dreaming their separate dreams. Then the clock struck 12, and the lid off the snuff box popped out, and inside was a black goblin, a sort of jack-in-the-box. "Tin soldier," said the goblin, "why are you staring at the dancer? Keep your eyes to yourself." But the tin soldier pretended not to hear. "I'm warning you, just wait until tomorrow," said the goblin. And in the morning, when the children woke up, they put all the tin soldiers on the windowsill. Perhaps it was the wind, or perhaps it was the goblin. But all at once the wind flew open, and the tin soldier fell head first 3 stories to the ground. It was a terrific descent, and at last he landed with one leg in the air and his bayonet caught between 2 paving stones. The little boy and the maidservant ran down to look for him, but though they almost stepped on the tin soldier, they never saw him. "Here I am!" He could have shouted to alert them, but he felt it was the wrong to ask for help when he was in his uniform. Presently it began to rain, and the drops fell faster and faster, until the lawns and the streets were flooded, and when the storm ended, 2 street urchins wandered by. "Look, a tin soldier," said one of them. "Let's make him a sailing." And so they made a boat out of newspaper, and they set the soldier in the middle of it, and away he sailed down the gutter, while the boat wildly and through the current whirled it around like a top. A shudder went through the tin soldier, but he only held his bayonet more firmly and looked straight ahead. Suddenly the boat sailed into a long wooden tunnel, and everything was dark. "Where am I going to now?" he thought. "I bet it's the fault of that goblin. But oh, if the little dancer were here in the boat, the darkness wouldn't mean nothing to me." At this moment, a big water rat who lived in the tunnel came up. "Have you a pass?" he asked. "Hand over your pass." The tin soldier did not speak, but clung ever more tightly to his gun. The paper boat rushed out onto the rat, and close behind him the rat gnashed his teeth and shouted loudly, "Stop! Stop him! Stop him! He hasn't paid his toll! He hasn't shown his pass!" And the words echoed through the walls of the tunnel, but no one was there. And the current grew stronger and stronger, and now the tin soldier saw daylight before him and heard a roaring, rushing sound. Imagine his terror. At the end of the tunnel was a great canal, and there was nothing to grab onto, no way to stop the boat at all. It whirled around 3 or 4 times and filled with water into the rim, and the tin soldier never winced but stood proud and erect, and the paper boat sank deeper and deeper. But before the water closed over his head, he thought of the pretty little dancer, of whom he would never see again. A song he had heard once ran in his ears, "Onward, onward, soldiers, for death is drawing near." Then the paper boat came apart, and the tin soldier fell through into the canal, and instantly he was swallowed by a big fish. How narrow and dark it felt inside the fish. But the tin soldier was steadfast. He lay there full length, shouldering his gun and waiting to see what was to become of him. The fish writhed back and forth, throwing its tail out and about, and then suddenly became very quiet, and a flash like lightning pierced through the soldier and saw broad daylight. "Well, look who's here," someone called loudly. "A tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to the market, and sold, and now it was in the kitchen where the cook had cut it open with a knife. She took the soldier up by the waist and carried him into the parlor, where everyone wanted to see the wonderful man who had traveled about in a fish. They set him on the table, and he looked around, and he saw that he was in the very same room where he had been before. There were the children, and the same toys standing upon the table, and there was the beautiful castle, and the little dancer in the doorway. She still balanced upon one leg and held the other high in the air, for she too was steadfast. The soldier was moved, and would have wept tears of tin if he had not been in uniform. He looked at her, and she looked at him, but they said nothing. And at that very moment, one of the little boys snatched up the tin soldier and threw him right into the fire. There was no reason why he should have done such a thing. Perhaps the goblin in the snuff box was to blame. The tin soldier stood there, all lit up by the flames. The heat was terrible. Perhaps it came from the real fire, or perhaps it was from love. He had lost his bright colors, but whether it was from the journey or from his sorrow, no one could tell. He looked at the little dancer, and she looked at him, and he felt himself melting away. But he stood steadfast and soldiered his gun bravely. And then suddenly a door opened, and the wind caught the little dancer, and she flew like a snowflake straight into the fire. She touched the tin soldier for an instant, and then blazed up in a flame. The next day, the maidservant came to take away the ashes. She found the tin soldier melted into the shape of a small tin heart, and the dancer, nothing remained of her, but her spangle burned black and shiny as coal. The end. I used to read that to my Toby. He was a preemie, and I used to tell him he was a steadfast tin soldier. The Little Match Girl. It was late the last evening of the year, and it was very cold and dark, and snowflakes fell thick and fast. Through the empty streets wandered a poor little girl who had no hat on her head, no shoes on her feet. And when she left home that morning, she had been wearing a pair of slippers, but they were so large that she lost them and they fell dashed across the street to avoid a huge carriage rolling towards her. One of the slippers had disappeared, and a young boy had picked up the other one and ran off with it. So the little girl was barefoot, and her feet were now blue with cold. And in her hands she carried a bundle of matches, and the pocket upon her apron was stuffed with them. All day long she tried to sell the matches, but no one had bought a single one, or even given a single penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along the icy streets. Lights shone in the dark windows, and the air was full of delicious aroma of roasted goose, a reminder of New Year's Eve. At last, in the corner between two houses, she sank down and pulled her feet under her, and she huddled across the wall. Still, she could not keep off the cold. She dared not go home, for she hadn't sold a single match, and she was certain her father would beat her. Besides, home was not much warmer than the cold street, for the walls were full of holes. Her father had stuffed the largest of them with straw and rags, but the wind still howled through the day and night. So the little girl remained near the wall, her hands almost frozen with cold. How much good a single match would do, she thought. Would she dare to pull out one from the bundle and strike it against the wall? She did. Psh! It burst into a flame, and it burned, and it gave off a warm, clear light like a candle. The little match girl held out her hand into the beautiful brightness, and it seemed as if she were sitting by a big iron stove with polished brass feet and glowing brass doors, and the fire blazed and sputtered, and it looked so real that the child stretched out her feet to warm them. And then the match flickered, and the brass stove vanished, and the little girl was left holding only a half-burnt match in her hand. Quickly, she struck another, and it flared, shining on the wall, which in an instant became a transparent glass. Though the little girl could see a warm, brightly lit room, there was a table covered with snow-white cloth and fine china plates and glass goblets, and in the center was a steaming roast goose stuffed with apples and prunes. And an amazing thing happened. The goose leaped up off the dish, and with a knife and fork still in its breast, came waddling over toward the little match girl. But before the girl could taste the goose, the match went out, and she found herself staring in the cold stone wall before her. She lit another match. This time was sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was taller and more brightly decorated than any she had glimpsed through the windows of the rich merchants' houses. Thousands of candles glowed upon its green branches, and colored pictures like those she had seen in the shop windows and shimmering all around it. The little match girl stretched out her hands towards the tree, and then the match went out, and the lights of the Christmas tree seemed to rise higher and higher until the little girl realized that she was looking at a twinkling stars in the sky. And then she saw one fall, leaving a bright tail of light behind it. Someone must be dying, thought the little girl, for her dead grandmother, who was the only person who had ever truly loved her, had once told her that whenever a star falls, a soul goes to heaven. She struck another match against the wall, and this time in the center of the bright light stood her grandmother. Her face looked so gentle and loving that the little girl cried out, "Oh, grandmother, please take me with you. I know that when this match blows out, you will go away, just like the warm stove, just like the roast goose, just like the Christmas tree. Please take me with you." The little match girl quickly lit the whole bundle of matches, for so she wanted her grandmother to stay with her, and the matches flared with a light that was brighter than the noon sun. Never had her grandmother looked so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and together they rose far above the cold streets and the dark town where there were no more hunger, no more pain, for they climbed all the way to heaven. The next morning, some people found the little girl still sitting against the stone wall. Her cheeks were pale and her little hands were blue, but she was smiling. She froze to death on the last night of the year, and in her little hand was a bundle of burnt matches. The poor child, the people said. She must have tried to warm herself, but none of them could know what beautiful things she had seen, nor what joy she had entered into in the new year with her grandmother.